It was the largest private residence in New York City, a monumental testament to power, wealth, and ambition until it wasn't. Charles Schwab's 75-room palace on Riverside Drive, once valued at a staggering $230 million, became a symbol of ultimate success in the Gilded Age. But behind its marble pillars and gilded walls, an inescapable reckoning was brewing. As the stock market crashed in 1929, Schwab's empire crumbled. The mansion, a beacon of lavish dreams, would soon be reclaimed, sold off, and ultimately demolished. What happened in those rooms, and how did one man's obsession with grandeur lead to his ruin? Charles Michael Schwab was born on February 18, 1862, in Williamsburg, Pennsylvania. His father was a woolens manufacturer. The family had modest means. Young Charles grew up in a world where wealth was something distant, something belonging to other people. But from an early age, he possessed something money could not buy: ambition. At 17, Schwab took a job as a stake driver at the Edgar Thomson Steel Works. He earned $1 per day. Within 6 months, he was promoted to assistant manager. The promotion was not luck. Schwab worked harder than anyone else. He studied every process. He memorized every machine. He understood that steel was the future, and he wanted to control that future. By 1886, Schwab had caught the attention of Andrew Carnegie himself. Carnegie saw potential in the young man. He promoted Schwab rapidly through the ranks. At 25, Schwab became superintendent of the Homestead Steel Works. At 35, he was president of Carnegie Steel Company. His rise was meteoric, almost unprecedented in American industry. The numbers tell the story. Under Schwab's leadership, Carnegie Steel's annual production increased from 2 million tons to 4 million tons. Profits soared from $21 million to $40 million. Schwab negotiated labor disputes, streamlined operations, and drove efficiency to levels never before seen in manufacturing. He was not just managing a steel company, he was building an empire. In 1901, J.P. Morgan orchestrated the sale of Carnegie Steel. The price was $480 million, the largest business transaction in American history at that time. Schwab played a crucial role in the negotiations. As his reward, he became the first president of United States Steel Corporation, the world's first billion-dollar corporation. At 39 years old, Charles Schwab commanded more industrial power than almost any man alive. The wealth followed. His annual salary reached $1 million. But salary was merely the beginning. Stock options, bonuses, and dividends multiplied his fortune exponentially. By 1902, Schwab's net worth exceeded $25 million, equivalent to roughly $700 million today. Money flowed like molten steel from his furnaces. With wealth came desire, not just for more money, but for recognition, for legacy, for something permanent that would announce to the world exactly who Charles Schwab had become. And so, in 1902, he began planning the ultimate statement of his success, a mansion unlike any America had ever seen. The location was chosen with precision. Riverside Drive, between 73rd and 74th Streets, overlooking the Hudson River. The land alone cost $650,000. The plot measured 200 feet along Riverside Drive and extended back 150 feet. It was one of the most prestigious addresses in Manhattan, a neighborhood where Gilded Age fortunes built their monuments. Schwab hired Maurice Hébert, a French architect known for Beaux-Arts grandeur. The instructions were simple: build the finest private residence in America. Money was no obstacle. Quality was the only consideration. Hebert returned with plans that took Schwab's breath away. The mansion would span 75 rooms across 4 floors and a basement. The structure would consume 90,000 square feet. To put this in perspective, the average New York townhouse of the era measured 5,000 square feet. Schwab's palace would be 18 times larger. The White House, by comparison, measured 55,000 square feet. Schwab was building something 40% larger than the president's residence. Construction began in 1902. The foundation required excavation of 30 feet into Manhattan bedrock. Steam shovels and teams of workers labored for months just to create the hole. Steel beams, appropriately, formed the skeleton. Schwab insisted on using steel from his own mills. The irony was not lost on observers. The house itself was a product of the empire that funded it. The exterior rose in French Renaissance style. Limestone and granite formed the facade. Carved details decorated every surface. Balconies, cornices, and ornamental stonework created a building that looked less like a home and more like a European palace transplanted to Manhattan. Neighbors watched in amazement as the structure grew, floor by floor, into something that dominated the entire block. By 1906, the mansion stood complete. The final cost exceeded $2 million, equivalent to roughly $70 million today. But the true value was far greater. When adjusted for the quality of materials, the craftsmanship, and the sheer scale, appraisers later valued the estate at $7 million. In modern terms, $230 million. Schwab had achieved his dream. The mansion announced his arrival among America's elite. Newspaper coverage was extensive and breathless. The New York Times described it as the most imposing residence in the city. Architectural journals devoted entire issues to its details. Schwab had built more than a home. He had built a monument. But monuments require maintenance. And maintenance requires money. As Schwab prepared to move into his palace, he could not have known that his greatest creation would become his greatest burden. The foundation was laid. The walls were up. The dream was real. What he could not see were the cracks already forming, invisible beneath the surface, waiting for pressure to make them split wide open. The exterior promised grandeur. The interior delivered on that promise with almost shocking excess. Every room was a statement. Every detail was a declaration. This was not merely wealth on display. This was wealth as religion, with Schwab as its high priest. The entrance hall measured 40 feet long and 25 feet high. Marble columns supported a vaulted ceiling, decorated with hand-painted frescoes. The marble came from quarries in Italy, transported across the Atlantic specifically for this project. The floor was laid in intricate geometric patterns, each piece cut by hand to fit perfectly with its neighbors. Visitors entering the mansion stepped into a space designed to inspire awe and, perhaps, intimidation. Beyond the entrance lay the grand staircase. Carved from canned stone imported from France, the staircase spiraled upward through 3 floors. The balustrade featured hand-wrought ironwork covered in gold leaf. Each step was wide enough for 3 people to ascend side by side. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Artisans had spent 18 months on the staircase alone. The ballroom occupied the entire west wing of the 2nd floor. It measured 70 feet long and 40 feet wide, with 30-foot ceilings. Crystal chandeliers hung at intervals, each containing hundreds of hand-cut crystals. The walls were paneled in carved walnut imported from England. Gilded mirrors reflected light from all angles, making the space seem even larger. The ballroom could accommodate 300 guests comfortably. Schwab hosted elaborate parties there, events that became legendary in New York society. The library held 10,000 volumes. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, constructed from hand-carved mahogany. A marble fireplace dominated one end of the room. Leather chairs and sofas provided spaces for reading. But this was not a working library. Few of the books showed signs of use. The library existed to communicate culture and education, whether or not Schwab actually consumed its contents. The dining room could seat 40 people at a single table. The table itself was carved from a single piece of oak. The chairs featured velvet upholstery and carved backs, each slightly different from its neighbors. China came from England. Crystal came from Bohemia. Silver came from workshops in France. A single dinner service cost more than most Americans earned in a year. The mansion included a gymnasium, a swimming pool, and a bowling alley. The gymnasium featured equipment imported from Germany. The swimming pool was lined with marble and featured a heating system to maintain water temperature year-round. The bowling alley had 4 lanes, each constructed to regulation specifications. These were not amenities typical of even the wealthiest homes. Schwab was creating a private world, a self-contained universe where he never needed to leave. The technological systems were equally impressive. The mansion featured 130 radiators for steam heat. A coal-fired boiler system in the basement generated steam for heating and hot water. The boiler consumed 10 tons of coal per week during winter months. A dedicated staff member managed the boiler around the clock. The annual coal bill alone exceeded $5,000. Electrical systems powered 250 light fixtures. Generators in the basement provided power, backed up by connection to the city electrical grid. The electrical bill ran $300 per month, at a time when average monthly rent in New York was $20. Lighting the mansion for 1 month cost more than most families spent on housing for a year. The estate employed a permanent staff of 35. This included a butler, assistant butler, 6 footmen, 8 maids, 4 cooks, 3 kitchen assistants, 2 laundresses, a head gardener, 4 assistant gardeners, a chauffeur, 2 stable hands, an electrician, a plumber, and a maintenance supervisor. Each employee received room and board in addition to salary. The annual payroll exceeded $40,000, but personnel costs were just the beginning. The mansion required constant upkeep. Marble needed cleaning, woodwork needed polishing, fabrics needed replacement, windows needed washing, the roof needed maintenance, gardens needed tending. The swimming pool required chemicals and cleaning. The bowling alley needed waxing. Every surface, every system, every detail demanded attention and money. Annual operating expenses totaled approximately $75,000. This covered staff salaries, utilities, coal, food for the household, supplies, and routine maintenance. It did not include major repairs or renovations. To put this in perspective, the median American household income in 1910 was $750 per year. Schwab spent 100 times the median income just to keep his house running. These costs would have been manageable if Schwab's fortune had remained stable. But stability was never part of his financial strategy. Schwab was, at heart, a speculator. He believed in his own invincibility, in the endless rise of American industry, in the permanence of his steel empire. In 1904, Schwab left his position at United States Steel. The departure was officially described as mutual. The reality was more complex. Schwab had clashed with J.P. Morgan over business strategy. More significantly, he had gambled heavily in the stock market and lost. His personal debts had begun to mount. Morgan, a man who valued financial conservatism, had lost confidence in Schwab's judgment. Undeterred, Schwab acquired Bethlehem Steel Company. He saw opportunity where others saw risk. Using a combination of his own money and borrowed funds, he purchased control of the struggling company. He implemented the same aggressive strategies that had worked at Carnegie Steel. Production increased, profits grew. By 1910, Bethlehem Steel was thriving, and Schwab's net worth had recovered. But recovery came at a price. To finance the Bethlehem Steel expansion, Schwab had leveraged his personal assets. The mansion, his stock holdings, even his art collection served as collateral for loans. He was playing a dangerous game, borrowing against assets whose value depended on continued economic growth. As long as the market rose, he was safe. If the market fell, everything would collapse. The 1920s brought extraordinary prosperity. The stock market soared to unprecedented heights. Speculation became the national pastime. Average Americans bought stocks on margin, borrowing money to purchase shares they could not otherwise afford. The assumption was simple: stocks always go up. The market would rise forever. There was no risk. Schwab participated enthusiastically. His holdings in Bethlehem Steel alone were worth millions. But he did not stop there. He bought shares in railroads, utilities, mining companies, and banks. He diversified, but he also leveraged. For every dollar of stock he owned, he borrowed $2 more to buy additional shares. His paper wealth multiplied exponentially. By 1928, Schwab's net worth exceeded $50 million. The mansion, once a bold statement, now seemed almost modest by comparison. He considered building a larger estate, perhaps something outside the city. He discussed plans with architects. He imagined something even grander. But beneath the prosperity, danger accumulated. The stock market had become detached from economic reality. Share prices bore no relationship to company earnings. Speculation had replaced investment. Everyone believed prices would keep rising because they had always risen. The logic was circular and fragile. Schwab had built his empire on steel. He had built his mansion on wealth. But both steel and wealth depended on foundations that were starting to crack. The market was a house of cards, and Schwab had built his palace on top of it. The question was not whether it would fall. The question was when and how far. October the 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. The stock market opened with a wave of selling. Prices dropped rapidly. Panic spread through the trading floor. By noon, 12 million shares had changed hands, nearly triple the normal daily volume. Major investors tried to stabilize the market by purchasing shares at inflated prices. The effort worked temporarily. The market closed down only moderately, but the respite was brief. October 28th brought renewed panic. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 13% in a single day. October 29th was worse. Black Tuesday. The market collapsed completely. 16 million shares traded. Prices fell another 12%. Fortunes evaporated in hours. Men who had been millionaires at breakfast were bankrupt by dinner. Charles Schwab watched his empire disintegrate. Bethlehem Steel shares, which had traded at $140 in September, fell to $78 by November. They would eventually drop to $18. His diversified portfolio suffered similar losses. Stocks he had purchased on margin now required immediate payment. Brokers demanded cash to cover the falling value. Schwab did not have cash. He had assets, all of them declining rapidly in value. The mansion, his greatest achievement, now became his greatest liability. The operating costs continued. Staff still needed salaries. Coal still needed purchasing. Utilities still required payment. But Schwab's income had collapsed. Bethlehem Steel, facing declining orders and falling prices, could not pay dividends. His other investments produced nothing. The money that had flowed so easily now dried up completely. He tried to borrow. Banks refused. The assets he offered as collateral had lost too much value. The mansion itself, once worth $7 million, was now nearly worthless. Who would buy a 75-room palace in the middle of an economic catastrophe? The market for such properties had disappeared overnight. Luxury was no longer admirable. It was obscene. By 1930, Schwab faced a crisis of mathematics. His debts totaled approximately $30 million. His assets, at current market prices, were worth perhaps $15 million. He was insolvent by $15 million. The gap was insurmountable. No amount of cost-cutting could bridge it. No recovery could happen fast enough. The logic was brutal and inescapable. He began selling possessions: art, furniture, jewelry, anything with value. The sales raised money, but not enough. The mansion's contents alone included items worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Auctions were arranged. Collectors bought paintings and sculptures at fraction of their original cost. Each sale was a humiliation, a public acknowledgement of failure. The staff had to be reduced. Schwab could not afford 35 employees. He cut the number to 15, then to 10. Rooms were closed off. The ballroom went dark. The swimming pool was drained. The bowling alley was abandoned. The mansion began to feel less like a palace and more like a mausoleum, empty and echoing. Property taxes presented another impossible burden. The assessment on the mansion was $800,000, requiring annual taxes of approximately $50,000. Schwab could not pay. He negotiated with the city, requesting reduced assessments and payment plans. The city agreed to some concessions, but the fundamental problem remained. The house cost more than it could ever generate. In 1931, creditors forced a reckoning. Banks holding mortgages on the mansion demanded payment. Schwab could not pay. The foreclosure process began. Legal documents were filed. Newspapers reported every detail. The man who had once embodied American success now personified American failure. The coverage was extensive and merciless. Schwab fought the foreclosure. He hired lawyers. He proposed reorganization plans. He offered alternative payment schedules. But the numbers were against him. The banks wanted their money. The courts sided with the banks. On September 15, 1931, Charles Schwab lost legal ownership of his mansion. The house was placed for sale. The asking price was $1 million, less than half the construction cost and 1/7 of its peak valuation. There were no buyers. The market for grand estates had vanished. Wealthy individuals were liquidating properties, not acquiring them. The mansion sat empty and unsold. Schwab was allowed to remain in residence temporarily, a humiliating arrangement where he lived in a house he no longer owned. He occupied a few rooms on the second floor. The rest remained dark and unused. The man who had entertained presidents and industrialists now lived as a tenant in his own former palace. His health declined. The stress of financial collapse manifested physically. He suffered from digestive problems, insomnia, and anxiety. His weight dropped. Friends reported he looked years older than his actual age. The psychological burden of losing everything proved as destructive as the financial burden. Bethlehem Steel survived, but barely. Schwab remained as chairman, though his influence had diminished. The company cut production, laid off workers, and struggled through the Depression. Schwab's salary was reduced to nothing. He worked without pay, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage. By 1933, the mansion sale finally occurred. A buyer emerged with an offer of $850,000. The sale price was roughly 40% of the construction cost and 12% of the peak valuation. The buyer was not an individual, but a consortium planning to convert the building into apartments. The plan never materialized. The mansion remained empty. Schwab moved to a modest apartment. The transition was stark, from 75 rooms to 4, from 35 staff to none, from commanding an empire to living on the charity of friends. The fall could not have been more complete. He died on September 18, 1939, at age 77. His estate was valued at $1,386,000, mostly in Bethlehem steel stock. The debts exceeded the assets. After paying creditors, nothing remained for his widow. The man who had once controlled billions left his wife destitute. The mansion outlived him by barely a year. In 1948, the building was demolished. The wrecking crews worked for months, dismantling what had taken years to construct. The marble was salvaged. The woodwork was burned. The steel beams were cut apart and sold for scrap. The foundations were filled with rubble. Within a year, no trace remained. An apartment building rose on the site, ordinary and anonymous. The demolition of Charles Schwab's mansion in 1948 was not merely the destruction of a building. It was the erasure of an entire philosophy, a worldview that had once seemed unshakable but had proven fatally flawed. The mansion had stood for 42 years. During that time, it witnessed the peak of American industrial power, the catastrophic collapse of the economy, a world war, and the emergence of a fundamentally different society. The building that had seemed so permanent, so indestructible, proved as temporary as everything else. What made the mansion's destruction particularly poignant was its symbolism. Schwab had built the palace to represent permanence, to create a legacy that would outlast him. He had chosen the finest materials specifically because they would endure. The marble would not crack. The steel would not rust. The craftsmanship would be admired for generations. He had envisioned the building standing for centuries, perhaps millennia, a monument to his achievement. Instead, it lasted less than half a century. The demolition demonstrated a fundamental truth that Schwab had never accepted. Nothing material lasts. Wealth is ephemeral. Buildings crumble, empires fall. The only things that endure are ideas, and even those require constant renewal to survive. The financial mechanics of Schwab's collapse reveal systemic problems that extended far beyond one man's mistakes. His story was not unique. Across America, wealthy individuals and corporations had engaged in the same dangerous speculation. They borrowed against assets. They assumed perpetual growth. They ignored risk. When the market crashed, the entire structure collapsed. The 1920s economy was built on illusion. Stock prices bore no relationship to corporate earnings. Banks loaned money with minimal collateral. Individuals borrowed to invest, creating a spiral of leverage that magnified both gains and losses. When the spiral reversed, the the losses multiplied catastrophically. Schwab was not an aberration. He was typical. His mistake was believing that his success was personal rather than systemic. He thought his wealth came from his intelligence, his work ethic, his business acumen. In reality, his wealth came from being in the right industry at the right time. Steel demand exploded during American industrial expansion. Schwab benefited from that demand. When demand collapsed, his wealth evaporated. The mansion embodied this confusion between personal achievement and systemic advantage. Schwab believed he had earned the right to build it. And in some sense, he had. He worked extraordinarily hard. He made smart business decisions. He created value. But the scale of his wealth, the magnitude of his success, was not proportional to his effort. It was proportional to the economic moment in which he operated. This misunderstanding led to his downfall. If wealth came from personal achievement, then it should be stable. Personal qualities do not disappear overnight. But Schwab's wealth was not based on personal qualities. It was based on market conditions. When those conditions changed, the wealth vanished. The mansion's operating costs illustrate another dimension of the problem. Schwab needed $75,000 per year just to maintain the building. That requirement never changed, regardless of his financial situation. The house demanded constant feeding, like a living organism. When Schwab could no longer feed it, the house consumed him instead. This dynamic repeats throughout history. Individuals acquire expensive assets during prosperous times. The assets generate pleasure and prestige, but they also generate obligations. Maintenance, taxes, staffing, these costs continue regardless of income. When income falls, the assets become traps. The owner cannot sell them quickly enough or at acceptable prices. The assets that once symbolized success become instruments of destruction. Schwab's personal life suffered as completely as his finances. His marriage became strained under the pressure of financial collapse. Friends disappeared when he could no longer entertain lavishly. Social invitations ceased. He became isolated, surrounded by the physical remnants of success, but devoid of the social connections that had once made that success meaningful. His health deterioration was not coincidental. Medical research has established clear connections between financial stress and physical illness. The anxiety of debt produces hormonal changes that damage cardiovascular and digestive systems. Sleep disruption impairs cognitive function and immune response. Schwab's physical collapse was the inevitable consequence of psychological trauma. The broader economic impact of the crash lasted far longer than individual fortunes. The Great Depression persisted for a decade. Unemployment reached 25%. Banks failed by the thousands. Businesses closed. Families lost homes. The social fabric tore in ways that required decades to repair. Schwab's story was one among millions, but his visibility made him a symbol. The mansion's construction had been celebrated in newspapers as a triumph of American capitalism. Its loss became a metaphor for capitalism's failure. The building that was supposed to prove the system's success instead demonstrated its fragility. Contemporary economists point to the 1920s as a case study in the dangers of under-regulated markets. The stock market boom was fueled by practices that are now illegal. Margin requirements were minimal. Insider trading was common. Market manipulation was routine. The crash revealed these problems, but only after immense damage had occurred. Schwab never acknowledged his own role in the system's failure. He viewed his collapse as bad luck, as an unforeseeable catastrophe. He did not recognize that his leverage, his speculation, his assumption of perpetual growth, were the very behaviors that made the crash inevitable. He was a victim, but he was also a perpetrator. The mansion's demolition in 1948 occurred during a period of renewed American prosperity. World War II had ended. The economy was growing. Housing demand was high. The decision to replace Schwab's palace with an ordinary apartment building was not financial. The land was valuable, but the mansion itself was worthless. No one wanted to live in a 75-room palace. The building represented values that no longer resonated. Post-war America valued efficiency over grandeur. The new middle class wanted convenience, not ostentation. The mansion, with its endless rooms and impossible maintenance requirements, seemed absurd. The apartment building that replaced it offered practical living space for dozens of families. It was democratic where the mansion had been aristocratic. The destruction took months. Crews photographed the interior before demolition, creating a visual record of what would be lost. The images are striking. Empty rooms filled with debris, marble staircases leading nowhere, ornate ceilings open to the sky. The photographs document not just a building, but an entire era passing into history. Some materials were salvaged. The marble was removed carefully and sold to other projects. The brass fixtures found new homes. The carved woodwork was burned because no one wanted it. The expense of removing and storing the materials exceeded their value. What had cost millions to create was worth pennies to destroy. The steel frame, appropriately, was cut apart and melted down. The metal that had come from Schwab's mills returned to mills to be reformed into new products. The circle was complete. The empire that had created the mansion consumed its remains. Today, no physical trace of the mansion exists. The apartment building that replaced it is ordinary and unremarkable. Residents live there unaware of what once occupied the site. There is no historical marker, no plaque, no indication that this location once held the largest private residence in New York City. This absence is itself meaningful. The mansion was built to achieve immortality. It achieved instead complete erasure. The building that was supposed to make Schwab's name eternal has instead made his name obscure. Most Americans have never heard of Charles Schwab. Those who have often confuse him with the founder of the modern investment firm, a different person entirely. The lesson is not that ambition is wrong. Ambition drove Schwab to genuine achievements. He improved steel production methods. He created jobs. He built a company that still exists today. And these were real contributions. The lesson is that ambition must be balanced against reality. Unchecked ambition, ambition that exceeds sustainable limits, becomes self-destructive. The mansion represented unsustainable ambition. It cost too much. It required too much. It demanded too much. In attempting to build something permanent, Schwab created something fragile. The very excess that made it impressive made it vulnerable. A more modest home would have survived the crash. The palace could not. Financial theorists use Schwab's story to illustrate the danger of leverage. Borrowing amplifies returns during growth, but magnifies losses during decline. Schwab leveraged everything. When the market rose, he became extraordinarily wealthy. When the market fell, he lost everything. The mansion, purchased largely with borrowed money, was both the symbol and the instrument of his destruction. The psychological dimension is equally important. Schwab's identity became inseparable from his wealth. He was not a person who happened to be rich. He was a rich person. When the wealth disappeared, his identity collapsed. He could not conceive of himself as anything other than successful. the loss of success felt like the loss of self. This is the ultimate tragedy, not the financial loss, painful as it was, not the mansion's destruction, symbolic as it was. The tragedy was the inability to imagine a meaningful life beyond material success. Schwab had built his entire existence on a foundation of wealth. When that foundation crumbled, he had nothing left to stand on. The mansion stands now only in photographs and memories, but the questions it raises remain urgent. What constitutes genuine achievement? What creates lasting value? What legacy endures beyond material possessions? These are not historical questions. They are eternal ones, and each generation must answer them anew. Charles Schwab built a palace to prove his importance. The palace is gone. The importance is forgotten. What remains is a story, a cautionary tale about the price of unchecked ambition and the fragility of all material things. In the end, the mansion achieved immortality not through its grandeur, but through its failure. The building that was meant to celebrate success instead teaches us about limits, about hubris, about the inevitable reckoning that awaits those who believe themselves exempt from gravity. The rise and fall of Charles Schwab's mansion reveals truths that transcend one building or one man. Every era produces individuals convinced of their own permanence. Every generation builds monuments to success, and every monument eventually falls, replaced by something new and equally temporary. If you found this story compelling, I invite you to explore other estates whose stories reveal the complex relationship between wealth, ambition, and legacy. What other grand homes should we examine? Share your suggestions in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this documentary, please consider liking and subscribing. These stories matter because they illuminate not just history, but human nature itself. Thank you for watching.